I know.
Yeah. So welcome to the Orange Water and Sewer Authority Board of Directors work session this Thursday, November 15th, 2018. I'm making an announcement that John Young is going to be absent today. Rushia Varga will be a few more minutes. He'll be late. And Robin Jacobs is filling in for Bob Epton, our general counsel. And does any board member know of any conflict of interest or potential conflict of interest with respect to any item on the agenda tonight? So we're going to update you. We had the new board members diversity and inclusion session with Visions, which was held on November 13th, 2018. It was attended by Jody, Bruce, Bob, and Ray, and myself, and Rushir. And so it was a very good meeting that we had with them, and we'll be scheduling a doodle poll for the full board training with Visions. Also, a doodle poll was emailed earlier today to schedule a work session to discuss communications and community relations. And once we have that, we'll be able to schedule that, that meeting. So announcements by board members. Jeff Danner, you have one?
But I'll fill in. This morning, the Chapel Hill appointees met with the Chapel Hill Town Council, subset of the Town Council who is works with OWASA. We went through key items of OWASA business with them, including a review of the recent water emergency. We talked to them about some of our initiatives on the Care to Share program and how those initiatives have helped to increase the amount of funds coming into that program. We did a review of tiny homes, those being homes of less than 800 square feet. There was a preliminary analysis whether we should also create a category for less than 500 square feet. It turns out there are only 9 such homes currently in our district, so that was not enough information to have data. So at this point, no change in the category of homes or fees to start. We reviewed our pilot program to start reaching out to some of the large apartment complexes in town so that we have better communication with our customers with whom we don't have direct contact, those who live in apartment complexes and other multi-family situations. We had a very efficient review of our Agua Vista program, indicating that about 80% of the meters in town have been upgraded to the automatic metering infrastructure, and that program remains on task or on schedule. And then also the decision, through the Chapel Hill Town Council for OWASA to participate in the 2019 Wyland National Mayor's Challenge for Water Conservation, which asks water customers to sign up and make a pledge to become more aware of and have more understanding of their water use, and to commit to conservation for 1 month. That's in April to correspond with Earth Day. So we had a good discussion with them. They had many questions, as is often the case. And at the end, we agreed that meeting 3 times per year, which we have been doing, met their needs.
Thank you. Bob Morgan.
The board's Human Resource Committee meeting scheduled for Wednesday, November 28th will be rescheduled for January 2019. The 2 topics remain the same: discuss retiree health insurance and employee 457 deferred compensation. Doodle poll will be sent in December regarding committee members' availability in January. Staff called me up and said with the current tasks that were being asked of them, they asked for a little bit more time to work on it, so I agree.
Thank you. Ray?
Actually, I have two, Yinka. The first one is that the Finance Committee will meet on Wednesday, December 5th at 5 p.m. in the boardroom, OWASA boardroom, to continue our discussion of the operating expenses and also to discuss the planning assumptions for the fiscal year 2020 budget. And then the second one is that Jody and I will meet with Penny Rich, Orange County Commissioners Penny Rich and Mark Markopoulos tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock at the Root Cellar to discuss the recent water main break on November 5th.
Thank you. John Morris?
Yes, the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee will meet on December 12th. We'll be reviewing management of OWASA forest lands around the Cane Creek Reservoir. And we're fortunate that all members of our committee recently toured these forest lands, guided by Johnny Riley, our ranger, and our forester, David Halley. So we learned a lot about the condition of the forest and about some management potential that there is out there. So our goals out at the reservoir are to protect reservoir water quality and maintain a healthy forest and wildlife habitat. So we'll be discussing what kind of management measures we need to take to reach those goals and how to inform and engage with the public. And so that'll be getting started on December 12th.
Thank you. Any other board members have announcements? Ed?
Yes, on November 12th, the Chamber of Commerce sponsored a meeting with the business community to talk about the November 5th and 6th water emergency. And also in attendance were officials from the University Hospital, elected officials, other community members. Yinka attended, as did John Morris, Bruce, and Jody, in addition to staff. And earlier this week, Linda emailed you a summary of that with a little more detail, and and I certainly will invite board members to talk about their experience with the meeting. But I thought it was a very positive discussion. I mean, the feedback was certainly fair and targeted and understandable and useful. A lot of good questions, good opportunity to interact. But I think it was a very productive conversation with the community, one of what will be many to come, and appreciate Aaron Nelson, the Chamber of Commerce, for facilitating that.
Thank you.
I may have missed this already, but I think we also, it sounds like we have an opportunity to meet up with the Carborough Town Council and the Chapel Hill Town Council. Did we already mention that earlier?
Well, yes, in the meeting this morning, we did talk about the three council members suggested, and the town manager already been in communication with me about that perhaps early next calendar year, we have an opportunity to address the full council about the water emergency, and more importantly, the actions planned and taken to improve system reliability. And Bob, I know you've reached out to Carborough, and of course, you've already heard Ray and Jody will be meeting with county commissioners tomorrow, but Bob, you might, to the mayor, Carborough.
For the record, I sent an email yesterday, and the mayor has not responded yet.
That's it. Thank you for
Okay,
staff.
thank you. Any other announcements? Okay. So items on our consent agenda, we have the minutes from the November 8th, 2018 closed session of the Board of Directors for the purpose of discussing a personal matter. Any member of the public would like to comment on that? Okay. Any board members would like to pull an item from the consent agenda? Okay, can I have a motion in a second? Okay. Okay, so motion made by John Morris, second by Bruce Bohm. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you. So now with our regular agenda, we're having discussion with our long-range water supply. We're having Ruth Rouse Planning and Development Manager provide us a presentation.
All right, thank you, Yinka. All right, so it seems like this has been a long road to finally get here. Not just with the recent storms, but for those of you that have been on the board a while, we've been talking about this moment for a while. So anyway, we're going to go through just some brief background information on the water supply plan itself and what that process is. And then we'll talk about our overall approach for developing those demand projections that are in your packet. You don't need to make any decisions this meeting, but we are looking for feedback from you all on, what do you think about the scenario or the assumptions that we put in there, how we accounted for the uncertainty in our what if scenarios and our next steps in particular. I will try to remember to prompt you on certain questions that we had in that agenda package, and so that we don't have everything kind of leaning toward the end there. So this map just gives us a little bit of background. The red outline is where our service area is, and I wanted to point that out because it is an assumption in the plan or in our demand projections that boundary does not change. The blue outlines are the watersheds of Cane Creek Reservoir and University Lake, our two major water supplies. And then also in the University Lake watershed, we have our off-stream storage in the Quarry Reservoir. And those three, University Lake, Cane Creek, and the Quarry Reservoir together provide us about 10.5 million gallons per day of water. And then you can also see Jordan Lake in that map. We also have an allocation from Jordan Lake of about 5% of its water supply pool. Currently, Cary and Apex have the only intake on Jordan Lake. So the only way that we can access that allocation is through our mutual aid agreements with Durham and the town of Cary. And Cary can then send treated water to Durham, and Durham can then wheel it to us through our interconnection. Just to give a little bit more background on kind of the Jordan Lake scenario, and also to give you a little preview of what we might be seeing later. OWASA did proactively purchase some land down in Chatham County on Jordan Lake in the event that we wanted to create a water treatment plant and intake on the lake. We have been working with the city of Durham as well as Chatham County and the town of Pittsboro. To date, all work has been funded by the city of Durham. And in particular, they funded two studies, one by Hazen and Sawyer that looked at a feasibility analysis of different kind of regional plant options down there. And the most cost-effective out of the options that they looked at was for one regional plant, and then finished water would be sent up to the various communities. And then the second study they did was by Raftelis, and that was finished earlier this year. And that was looking at kind of the cost implications and what that would mean on potential rates and how you'd want to finance this. So Durham, we very much appreciate the money and the effort that they've put into this, but they have now said that from now on, people have to start participating with them financially. So we're talking about forming an interlocal agreement between those four entities that we will bring to you likely sometime in 2019 that looks at governance of a potential partnership. And then also for some preliminary studies, how would we fund those? How would we cost share those? And also looking at if someone wanted to opt out of any studies, how could they later participate in the partnership should they want to do so. Man, that came out all garbled here. So. Yes, John.
Are these studies that you're talking about, would they all be related to a Western intake?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But Ruth, just on that line, just to make sure I heard correctly, because I've been through this discussion a number of times. I'm not sure I appreciate it until this evening. So, so the primary plan at this point would be to not only place the intake there on the western shore, but to build a water treatment plant nearby, shared amongst the authorities, not to pump raw water to the existing facilities?
That is one alternative that we could look at in the long-range water supply plan.
Because
partnering in a plant such as that.
Yeah, my recollection of earlier discussions from earlier years, I thought our focus was more at that point on bringing raw water to the existing plants. Am I Is my memory faulty, or is that a change in emphasis of the discussion?
And Hazen and Sawyer's feasibility study, they did look at that as having one intake and then shipping off raw water to each of the local governments to then treat at their own treatment plant. That actually was more expensive than having one treatment plant that would then.
That doesn't surprise me. I just wonder if there had, it seemed like a change in emphasis, but I only hear about this once every 6 months, so I was just curious.
If you would, with your pointer, just outline the parcels, because I'm a little confused by that the red markers.
Well, yeah. Yep. So anything outlined in red, and it is kind of hard to see right here, but there's a bunch of small parcels that make up about 120 acres that we own. They're all contiguous. And then I think it's important to note that, we have to go across core land to get to Jordan Lake. And that is one of the early things that if we participated with these partners in, that they would look at starting that permit process to be able to access core land.
And Ruth, if I could add, that land OWASA purchased in the 80s, but it followed studying the lake, and that land is adjacent to a part of Jordan Lake, studied to be a suitable and good location for a raw water intake.
All right, so yeah. Do I need to go
Suitable
back? Or?
for, yeah, back up one more thing. So it's suitable for raw water intake, but is it like in a floodplain for a treatment plant? It seems like it'd be.
No, it'd be out of the floodplain.
Okay, thanks.
All right, so this schematic has been around for a while, so it might look familiar to some of you, but it outlines the tasks to complete the long-range water supply plan. And these tasks were outlined in a charter that the board approved back in 2014. And what that charter was, it outlined kind of why we wanted to do a long-range water supply plan, some high-level goals of it. It also talked about alternatives that we did not want to consider that were outlined in the 2010 that we said it didn't make sense to continue to look at those. And then it kind of outlined what the tasks were and what the deliverables of that. So we did complete goals and objectives. Those were approved by the board in November 2016. There was a community engagement plan also that was done. Originally, it was approved by the board in February 2015. And then at that November meeting, there was a conversation that really what the public was most interested in was probably how much water do we need, how much do we have, and what are the options to meet those long-range demands and the pros and cons of those options to meet those demands. So the community engagement plan at that point was revised to put emphasis really on this task 5 and then 6 and 7. So we're here tonight on tasks 2, 3, and 4, and that should say, I guess, November. Got to update that. But we've got the demand projections, we've got information for you on the yield, and then you'll see on a graph later this evening that we really don't have any supply shortfalls under normal conditions. If we got into an extended drought or an emergency situation, then we may need other sources of water. The 5th task then is to identify different supply and management, demand management. So a supply option is like a actual water supply. So like Jordan Lake would be a supply option. Whereas demand management is more like how can we get customers to conserve more water. And then we'll evaluate those options, talking about bringing that back in probably early 2020, and then you select those options. And I anticipate that task 6 and 7 will be an iterative process between you all and the community as well. And then once you've selected what our options are, then we want to develop the plan itself, which would outline any implementation. And then implement it. So just wanted to check in with you all on this. Do you have any questions or feedback on just the overall process? Okay. All right, so demand projections are very essential for our planning purposes. Obviously, we're going to be using them in the long-range water supply plan. But also we look at them, we'll take those demand projections and also then translate them into what does that mean in terms of water treatment as well as the capacity at our wastewater treatment plant. For each of those three uses, we don't really need to know where the growth is happening. We just need to know the overall amount. However, when we start looking at them for how big do we need to size our pipes and our pump stations and that kind of thing, then we need to know where that growth is occurring. So that these demand projections will also feed into the hydraulic modeling that we do of our water and our wastewater systems throughout the community. It also can determine whether we need to upsize anything in our reclaimed water system, or whether there might be some other opportunities in the future for expanding that reclaimed water system. And then also, depending on the types of development, what might be the best conservation strategies that we can implement. All right, I'm going to tell you, I won't read all these questions to you, but I am very confident that what I'm about to tell you this evening is wrong. So I've had two quotes that were kind of told to us recently. One of those was from John Hodges-Koppel, who is the Regional Planning Director over at Triangle J Council of Governments. And he was kind of behind a lot of this regional transportation planning that our demand projections are based on. And his quote was, "We serve to provide you with the right amount of wrong." And then my favorite one was Dr. Greg Chiroklis over at UNC. We were talking to him about some of our demand projections. And he said, what we want to ask ourselves is, how wrong can we be before we start making bad decisions? And I thought that was a really good kind of way to look at it there. To kind of tuck that in your brain as we move through the presentation this evening. All right, so since we know that we're going to be wrong and we have a lot of uncertainty, felt like it's very important that we outline what our key assumptions are and that those are clear to you all as well as the public. So our number, as I already mentioned, our service boundary, we're assuming that that is going to remain the same. Other assumptions is that our regulations will allow us to continue using our reclaimed water system, as well as we have a recycle system over at the water treatment plant. And those really do have a big impact on the amount of raw water that we need. So if anything happened that would jeopardize the use of those, that would make our raw water demands go up pretty significantly. The information that we got based on the regional transportation planning, we got 2045 data at both what they called their community plans, which is basically kind of what's in the local governments, what do they plan for different areas. So it could be based on zoning, or it could be something that they know might change in the future. And then they also gave us a build out. So what we've done is we've assumed that everything is happening at a linear rate. So if over, say, 20, I'm going to use 20 years and 400 new houses over 20 years, that they were going to get 20 new houses each year. So we assumed that linear rate. And then we also assumed that the build out would occur in 2070. And that seemed to make a little bit of sense. And when you see the graphs at the end, I think well, you may or may not agree with that. And then we used yes.
What does build out mean in this context?
Yeah.
So it means like based on kind of the current zoning, current plans that the communities have in place, how many new residences, how much commercial square footage could you fit in that area? So if they change their zoning, it could change. So what we're assuming that build out under current zoning.
So what that means is that in 2070, there's no more building that could occur.
In theory.
In theory, with the current rule. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
I think an important thing to understand, Chapel Hill and Carver are very different than other towns. We have designated the boundary on how big we're going to be, and we're not going to expand beyond those boundaries. And so we have a finite number of units.
So I had a question on that. It sounds like, how do we know that that is rigid? Like,
that is the commitment of the county, Chapel Hill and Carver board. It was part of the joint planning agreement that happened 20-some years ago.
okay. And how much would it take to
Just celebrate it.
to change that?
Would you,
Uh,
It would take 3 governments at
Yeah.
least.
The three, yeah, I was going to give a smart answer. It would take the 3 governments to agree to undo it.
That's
Yeah,
not
I
likely.
think it took us about 5 years to write the joint planning agreement, so it would be a long process.
Okay.
But outside of that boundary is the rural buffer, and it's going to be developed at lower densities that cannot be supported by water and sewer.
Right. Okay.
just, if I could comment in response to Ruth here, Ruth also included in her document 5 or 6 tests, sensitivity tests. So what if our assumptions are not true? You know, what if there is new development outside the current service boundary? What if people stop conserving and start to use more water per capita? You know, what if, you know, other things happen? So she's already built into her planning document some quantitative estimates of how these things what the quantitative effect would be if things go wrong in terms of our assumptions. So we kind of have a boundary around that.
All right, so, and then the unit demands, we looked at 4 years of data, calendar year 2014 through 2017, to come up with what those unit demands were. And then non-revenue water, so that's water that we use to flush our lines, leaks in the system, that kind of thing, that accounts for 10% of our raw water demands. And typically we run from like 90 to 92% of revenue water. And that we're also saying that there's not going to be any major expansion of the reclaimed water system. UNC doesn't, to our knowledge, doesn't have any major plans to expand that in a major way. And then we also built in conservation, both for new development as well as existing demands. So our existing residences, residential development and commercial development over time would be able to conserve a little bit more. And those ranged anywhere from 5 to 10%. So do you have any comments or questions or feedback on any of those key assumptions? All right, because there's a lot of uncertainty, we came up with a pretty simple approach. This does even oversimplify it a little bit more from that, but basically we took what our demands were in 2070, so we used our actual water demand data. And then we used the information from the local governments on how many new dwelling units. We separated them out by single family and multifamily because that's how they gave that information to us. And then we also had information on the amount of new commercial square footage. And then based on our data, we came up with the unit demands. When I say unit demands, I'm meaning how many gallons per day per dwelling unit or how many gallons per day per square foot for commercial type development. You multiply that together, add it to your 2017 demands, and you get your future demands. But again, we did add in conservation, and we accounted for non-revenue water as well in that approach.
This one I did have a question on. The assumption is that the number of residents per dwelling unit will remain constant, I believe, in your model for single family and then for multi.
We didn't really base it on, we based it on the dwelling units themselves. So
Right.
it's the consumption per dwelling unit
Right.
would remain
Well,
fairly
that
constant.
okay, that
So-
assumes that
Yeah.
either the number of people stay the same
right.
and they use the same amount of
And
water.
right.
I'm not sure that's a good assumption because I think net countrywide there's a movement towards more dense living and more people per unit, per dwelling unit. And I think that's driven by environmental awareness and the realities of personal income growing at a lower rate, i.e. there's more service employment opportunities available going forward than there was historically, and those tend to be at lower wages, which means folks don't have as much resource available to spend on housing, which means there'll be essentially more people per dwelling. That's a mostly uneducated opinion, although
Okay.
I've read a little bit about it. So I would test that one very carefully because I think that can make a huge difference in the demand. Because the number of dwelling units stays within whatever the requirements are from the cities, but the population can grow dramatically.
Right. And I think we used, I think it comes out to about 140 gallons per day for a single family dwelling unit and 110 gallons per day for a multifamily dwelling unit. And that is pretty comparable to what is happening right now. Now we did add some additional conservation and stuff like that, but I think you could also make the case that kind of argue back and forth. We could argue a whole range of some of those plots in there where we show you some scatter plots of what the data were. There's a huge variability in that. But I think that when we get to the what if, do we want to what if that more? When we get to the what if scenarios. So we could put different bounds on it.
Sure, but do you have as an input the number of people per dwelling unit, or would you have to just increase the number of dwelling units to make that change in the model? I don't know if we need to get into that level of detail.
I think it works either way. I mean,
okay,
because you could we could either increase the unit demand, or we can increase the number of dwellings.
I suppose,
So-
yeah, okay.
But I just wanted to make sure, did anyone else have any other comments or feedback on that overall approach? Okay. So just based on those assumptions, this graphic shows what our projected demands are as well as our yield, and I'll start with the yield. Currently, as I mentioned earlier, we have a yield of about 10.5 million gallons per day based on the 2001-2002 drought of record. That drought of record changes, that yield line kind of shifts down a little bit. Then in about 2025, we will drain the existing quarry so that American Stone can, where they're currently mining, will join the existing quarry with their, and we'll have one big quarry hole in the ground. So their permit expires on December 31, 2030. So at this point, we will start refilling the quarry with water from Cane Creek Reservoir. So it doesn't really stay level, it somehow curves up. Depending on how wet it is. So if we have weather like we've been having recently, we could probably fill it pretty quickly. If we're in a dry spot, it could take longer. So conservatively, we've just said 2035. And at that point, our yield goes up to about 12.6 MGD. So the other line on here is the projected demands that were based on kind of that method and those assumptions that we just went through. So if you remember, we also said that in 2045, we assume build out of 2070. In my mind, that's still fair. It's not a huge change in the slopes. That probably wasn't too bad of an assumption there. Also, when we do back calculate kind of the population, our population projections kind of are in line with other ones that have been provided through other sources. So, but to get, there was another thing here, Bruce, while it pops into my head. We did have a conversation with the demographer over at UNC, and she told me that a good population projection goes out 10 years and is plus or minus 10%. So she goes, you're looking out 50 years. And so I came out of that meeting going, oh, I'm going to just crawl under my desk here. But so, yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty in what we're doing. But if our assumptions, if we notice that they're wrong by either census data or our own data from unit demands, or we can always go back and look at how big a change that having on our. Yeah, John.
Does this graph of the yield, does that reflect subtracting 20% that we would withhold?
Yes.
As a reserve? So in other words, this has a 20% buffer built into it, and if we drained it to the last drop, it would be, the yield would be 20% higher than that.
We get about, it saves us, it gives us about, not under current demands, it's about 90 days of storage.
And of course, it does not include the Jordan Lake application.
Yeah.
So this is based on the 2001, 2002 drought of record. I don't know if there is such a thing as like a 500-year drought. Like, I know there is for storms, but is there, is there anything like that in hydrology?
They can go back and, I mean, we are working with that grad student at University of South Carolina and kind of preliminary, I mean, she can go back and look at like tree ring data and what she's doing is recreating kind of hydrology over a longer time period. And just kind of based on that, I still think that this is probably still fairly conservative. Yes, that line may shift down. We might get a new drought of record, but I still have quite a bit of confidence in that yield. Like I wouldn't see it changing dramatically. Just based, I mean, but that's based on modeling. And as we all know, as Ed pointed out last week, we had two 500-year events.
Took the words right out of my mouth. How well does
in
the
2.5 months. So, I mean, I think it's always good to be prepared and to have plans in place that we can start thinking about.
But I think we understood from Larry Bann, who used to be at UNC, that looking back at tree ring data, there I said it, that there were periods of time where droughts were much more severe and longer in duration than what we call the drought of record. And how many years is that? 80 some years of stream flow?
Right.
So it's not a long period of time. When we say drought of record, that's just drought in 80 years. But if you look back hundreds of years, yeah, most certainly there have been worse droughts, more sustained droughts. So, and of course, resiliency is a big word right now, and it certainly applies to water supply as well. How resilient do we need it to be in the worst of droughts, and just how bad could a drought be?
I mean, I'd be curious, just some sort of sensitivity of, the worst drought we have that we know of, with your UNC student or whatever data you have, is it just going down, 0.5?
Yeah, what she's doing isn't necessarily looking at, changing our yield. What she's looking at is, given this different hydrology and then looking at, what type of events might, let me put this, so let's just round it to 13 MGD, all right? So, or we could round it, let's use 12, because that's about what our demands are going to be. So, looking then at global climate change records or models, how likely is it for those hydrologic conditions to happen? And so and then she can run a bunch of times to see how many would we fail that 12 meeting that projected demand. So that's kind of what she's doing. It's more of a risk type analysis, and it's meant to be, it won't help us make decisions during a drought. I want to point that out. What it's meant to do is looking at the big picture of, how confident are we going to be that we can actually meet the demand, whatever demand that we give her under different climate change scenarios. And again, based on modeling. Yeah.
So, Ruth, just a comment and a question. Just one of my comments is I really like the graph on page 218 showing all of our projections from 1969 forward. And I assume after this study is complete, you'll add the 2018 line to that graph. But the question I have is, we've looked at this graph or versions of this graph frequently in the past. And I'm assuming previous versions showed some version of the 2011 projection, which looks like the most recent, thorough one. And because I recall, that, I don't know what to call it, maybe that pinch point at 2035 in our earlier discussions was closer. We used to, so that's why I think it'd be interesting, as soon as you probably are able to, you probably could now put the 2018 projection on here, because, when I first joined the board, that was close, and we spent more time talking about whether we were going to run into trouble in 2032-ish And when I look at this now, I think at least our projections at the moment show more comfort. So I just think that would be an interesting comparison as we look at
Right.
our planning, because and that gets closer into the time window, 2035 versus 2070. But,
Right. I know there is a table in here somewhere that shows the difference between the 2010 plan and.
yeah, it's here on page 2.5, which is a really good table, but just visually,
Yeah.
it's helpful
Yep.
because that used to be a lot
It
closer.
did, yeah, it was closer. Yep, absolutely. And I do want to point out that this graph actually gives me a little bit of heartburn because I've been telling you that it looks like I'm very certain in what the demands are, and I'm not. So in the final version, that will not stay as a solid line. There will be we'll account for some uncertainty in that, and that's coming up next. So we did put some what if scenarios in there, and we looked at the residential and non-residential growth. It could either be the rate of growth or the actual unit demands, since we're doing a linear, and it could be higher or lower, and you get the same difference if you're using the same kind of increase or decrease. We also, UNC has talked about expanding their reclaimed water system to meet cooling demands at the cogeneration plant, so we did do that. That one actually serves to reduce our raw water demands. We did put a scenario in, what if the local governments extended the urban service area? And a comment was made, I think from John, that we might want to generic size that a little bit. So we will make it generic, like if a hypothetical 1,000-acre expanded by 1,000 acres and under looking like a Meadowmont or a Southern Village type development, what would the change in demand be? And then we also looked at what if we can no longer use the water treatment recycle system or the reclaimed water system. So just wanted to ask, do you have any feedback on those what if scenarios? Or are there other ones you want us to add, I guess, or?
Yeah. I see that this student at the University of South Carolina is doing a study on the likelihood of extended drought, I guess is what you think.
Right.
Well, also there's mention here that Hazen and Sawyer is doing an investigation of the effect of weather on water demand.
Yes.
Well, I wonder if you could add a row here for increased water demand with temperature increase, if that would be a reasonable item to include in your what if scenario.
Yeah, and it's kind of covered in that number one, if the residential growth was higher, because it could be a growth you could have both happening. You have residential growth happening faster or slower, and then your demand could go up or down. So,
well, I thought that that first column was more along the lines of what Bruce was talking about, either a greater density of people or more people than you thought. So, and I think it would be useful to break that out.
Okay.
Because even though models are always wrong to some extent, they do provide a very good way of articulating our beliefs and assumptions of the system. So to separate out climate change, I think would be useful here.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that too. We're not sure how demands will change climate change. Any other kind of big picture questions? Yes?
But this is just a check-in. I know that climate change is the warming of the planet, but our experience to date is that we're getting more moisture, whether that's from the climate change than we're getting droughts. So, whereas on the West Coast, they're getting the drought. So you're going to have to look at it both ways, I'm assuming.
Well, yeah, for our kind of general area, it might get a little wetter, but it will become in kind of higher intensity, shorter duration storms, and more frequent drought potentially as well.
Yeah.
But on average, you're right, we're going to get the same or a little bit more rain.
I don't know how much agriculture is in our service area. And if there is a substantial amount relative to some of these other factors that you look at, then it probably is worth looking at increases to irrigation. Is agriculture a significant factor at all?
No, I mean, we've got a pretty tight service area boundary there, so it's not. I mean, do people, would they irrigate their, I don't think we see a whole lot of irrigation in our community in terms of fescue. I think people's gardens, they'll water that kind of thing, but.
A couple comments to follow up on those last two comments of Bob's and Bruce's. I believe that what we're looking at here in Table 2 is for demand. So there may very well be sufficient precipitation to meet the water supply needs, but we're just looking at demand here. And presumably, as temperature increases, the demand will go up somewhat. If people drink more water, they will water their lawn, so there will be some additional irrigation in the hotter temperature. So that's the 2 comments. Appreciate it.
Couple things. The 10% like water loss, is that what that is? There's like a 10% lost it.
Yeah. We have 10% non-revenue water.
Yeah, is that from water loss? What does that mean?
Some of it is not lost. Some of it's stuff that we actually use. So if they're flushing our lines, we're using water. If we are, the towns are doing hydrant tests, that kind of thing. So it's non-revenue, but some of it is accounted for.
Is that, it seemed high to me, but is that normal, that percentage? Or
That's fairly low, actually.
is it?
Oh.
Hi, Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager. Our water loss, every year we do, we use the AWWA methodology to do a water loss audit, and our numbers are very low. The board's going to receive a deep dive on water loss at the December 13th meeting, so you guys will get to jump into that. But what we see in kind of historically trends is that it is low.
Great. Thank you. The other quick question was, the demand projections look like the towns and UNC, they're not updated that frequently. How frequent do you think it should be done for our purposes? Like, it seems like it's really irregular and like not that accurate and not that frequent.
Well, the towns are going to be looking at population, that kind of thing. They do look at it when they do the State of the Community report. I think this is the first year they kind of looked at it in a kind of planned, working together manner. So we're who would be updating the demand projections based on the growth information that the towns provide to us. So, I mean, to look at, I would say that we'd want to update them every 5 to 10 years. And it depends on how, you know, when we go back and look at our assumptions, are those assumptions, do we still feel they're valid or not? Is there something happening where we feel like we need to do it more frequently? So, but in general, I would say every 5 to 10 years, we want to look at it. And I would sync that up. The local governments do this regional transportation planning periodically. We might want to sync that with them. And I know that we've already been talking to them that we'd like to be involved earlier because there are certain ways we might have them set it up differently this go around if they knew it was going to be used for water supply planning purposes as well.
There might be something to put on that that, you know, that.
It's on there.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
I would add, Rashid, that municipalities typically look at that every year, budget cycle, because state revenues are based upon the population. So they watch that pretty closely, especially if the state's projection get off skew to what the city thinks are in there. I know a couple of times when I was at Carlo, we found states estimate because they weren't taking certain things. So we're looking at it on an annual basis.
All right. Before we move on from here, I also wanted to point out that these what-if scenarios were all done individually, and we can use those to kind of come up with some kind of error bars on that projection. But there can be more sophisticated ways that we could look at that if you wanted us to go down those paths. So kind of at the other end of the spectrum is what is known as Monte Carlo analysis, where you're putting probability functions. Typically it would be normal or log normal type distributions. And then you're running these what ifs 1,000 or more times, and then you're getting a range. So some of them will be increasing, some of them will be decreasing on a given run. So you can look at, okay, what's the probability that we're gonna stay below like that 12.6 MGD? How often does that occur? So we could do something more sophisticated like that. That goes beyond my Excel skills, I feel. So we would need some help from a consulting firm. So I did want to point that out, but they could do it pretty cost effectively. And then between those is kind of similar to a Monte Carlo analysis, but then rather than trying to assume what your distribution is and what the variability around the mean of it is, you could just assume a range of potential. So we could look at the residential would range from, I don't know, 3,000 gallons per month up to 5,000 gallons per month. And then they'd have a uniform distribution assumed. So any of those flows would be equal probability of being picked in any one of those scenarios. That would be more cost effective, and I might be able to get some grad student help on that. So I didn't know if those were things that you'd like staff to look into further. Would that be helpful to you to actually have a little more rigor put into that statistical analysis?
Go ahead.
Please.
My understanding of Monte Carlo is that it's very helpful if the variables are dependent on each other. My hunch is that these are pretty independent. So I don't, not the inputs that are going into the model are independent of each other. Again, I'm no expert on it, but if it would involve a fair bit of cost and your time, my hunch is that you're better off doing a sensitivity analysis over a wider range than just 10%. That may be, my recollection is that you're going up and down 10% on some of the variables on the input. I would probably do a wider range than that.
But then how do you add them? Do you have a recommendation on how you would add them if that wider range?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know the number of inputs going in, but I think if they are truly independent, you can just do the max or the worst case for each of them and add them up. Maybe much more of an expert on this than
well, I'm a fan of Monte Carlo simulation, and I think what that would add to this is you'd be again articulating a probability distribution. Wouldn't be and not all of these, in my opinion, are independent of each other. So I'd like the staff. I'd be in favor of the staff looking into what the cost would be to do a Monte Carlo simulation.
John was. Okay.
Just and it's really based on my experience doing sensitivity analyses and hydrologic modeling that they're useful, but boy, nothing really beats the output of a Monte Carlo simulation for a cloud of probability, of probable results.
Yeah, I've used them all in modeling as well, and they are useful for that. I just always kind of wonder, do we really know what that distribution is? Do we really know what the variability is around it? So again, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt, the results too.
Well, exactly, but it forces us to articulate what we think the probability distribution is. And then people can take exception to that.
And Ruth, do you think that would delay any of the task and schedule you laid out earlier if we were to do that? Is that, in addition to cost, is there anything else?
I wouldn't see a major delay in,
that's what I
in
assumed.
schedule.
Because we could
kind of
proceed
depends
with,
on
yeah.
what all Hazen has going on.
I have, it's been a while. I guess I'm a little bit agnostic on whether we go forward, happy to look at the cost. I'd be a little more interested if our demand and yield looked a little scary or close. I'd want to take a little bit of a closer look. I guess I take some comfort in the graph that you don't like, that doesn't have the range. And so yeah, I mean, I think it would be interesting data. If we can have it done cost effectively and without it impacting schedule, it'd be great. But so other than part of the Bob's question, I was just going to remain mum, which is rare. So you could have appreciated it. Sorry.
And I know
But
that the
thanks for the
uniform distribution one would be pretty quick and simple. So.
Uniform distribution assumes essentially complete ignorance, and I don't think we can claim that.
Yes, John.
I have a couple of kind of overall comments, but I don't know if we're at that point yet.
All right, why don't we just keep going, and then if I answer them,
Okay.
great. If I don't,
Okay.
chime in at the end, because we're almost done. So. All right, so our next steps, this is I think it's my last slide, so, is to incorporate the feedback that you've provided tonight. So I've heard a couple different things in terms of the what if, and I'll also check in with Hazen on terms of whether there be any schedule impact and what the cost of that would be. Hazen does have in their scope of work to evaluate the impacts of the last, because we've looked at 2014 to 2017 as for our unit demands, and these have been pretty wet years. And so did that impact our choice on unit demand? So they're going to be looking at that as well, and that is part of their scope. We want to share the report with the towns as well as UNC and the county. We also want to share it with our neighboring utilities, and I will also have our consultant kind of give it a careful review as well. So a lot of that can all happen concurrently. And then we will revise those projections to include that uncertainty as we've discussed tonight. So it might be Monte Carlo, it might be, I'll get back to you all on that, and revise the report and bring that back to you. I think it's on your schedule for February. And then at that point, you could accept it as final projections with uncertainty and report. And again, nothing is ever set in stone. We can always go back and revisit them if we say, oops, we made a mistake in this key assumption.
Ruth, is there something in there about there was something in the report about, I don't know what page it was, that the climate change
right.
analysis of our situation would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to change
our
yield at all, but I will see if I can poke and prod and get like more of a written report from her.
It's not going to change the yield? You have enough information already?
No, what she's doing won't change our yield. It will give us kind of an understanding of under under the hydraulic conditions that are predicted to have an impact on our yield, how likely are those to occur under the different global climate change models?
Definitely interested in seeing that, though.
Okay.
I don't know whether it should be a part of one of those bullets or not. But.
It's great having free help. And then there's no, like, I can only push as much as I can push. So, so that I don't think it's a piece that keeps us from moving forward with the long-range water supply plan, but it's a piece that we might be able to embellish over time with it. So, John, did you have other questions or things that you wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think, this analysis of our future demands, it's extremely thorough. It's well thought out. It's extremely well written. It's just a great product. And, the quality of the written reports we get from OWASA is generally very high, but this is way up at the top. So, I feel that right now we're in good shape with this part of the product because, we have a big margin of our existing supply over our demand. So it's not that we have to carry things out to too many decimal places right at this point. And I think Ruth has done a good job of this list of what ifs, and those are quantified and show how much our demand might go one way or the other if those things change. So I think, this is a good foundation to build on. I have one comment about Jordan Lake. Jordan Lake has been shimmering out there like a mirage on the horizon for a long time. And we know that in 2019 and 2020, we're going to start to consider that source in detail, in the planning. So Ed, I think it would be helpful to us if the staff could give us kind of a look ahead to what using Jordan Lake would involve. For example, what's the current status of infrastructure for getting water through Cary and Durham? And I know there's a report out there that documents that. What kind of agreements would we need with Cary and Durham, to make that a reality? Does the water and sewer boundary agreement limit our ability to use water from Jordan Lake? There's a difference of opinion on that. I don't think it does, but we need to, we ought to be clear about that. So I think it would be extremely helpful to get a, not a big report, but a concise report using existing information, of which we have a lot. That would just help the board see a roadmap going forward, so we would kind of know what the major issues are. And we've had a big discussion lately of the need to have resiliency in our system for emergencies of different types, and it may be that looking at this possibility of getting Jordan water through Cary and Durham might be an important element in that resiliency examination. So do you think you could help us out with something like that to just give us a roadmap of what's ahead?
Yes, I think we could at least describe the issues in play, the scope, and, there may well be some significant phasing. For instance, right now, as Ruth explained, our only avenue is through Cary, Apex, Durham, the mutual aid agreements. But with the planning work that's starting to accelerate finally on a western intake, perhaps 10 years out, there's a new opportunity that would make, we may not want to make a major infrastructure investment in Cary Durham arrangement, knowing that 10 years out, here comes perhaps even a better opportunity. Or how could those be phased where we aren't being short-sighted in how we approach that? So it also is very complicated. So I think we could describe in a short paper the kinds of issues, what's infrastructure's in place now, how much we can reliably get, and how that impacts our neighbors. In fact, some of that planning work's just ongoing.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
But I don't know that we could have enough information to say, well, there's our path.
No, this is pulling together existing information so we can understand it better. And I'd like to look at the possibility of getting water through Cary and Durham, which is the more immediate possibility. And, we have a report on what the existing infrastructure is, which is a lot. So, there may not be a big capital investment that's needed to make that more of a reality. It may be more of a thing of reaching agreements.
Right. Well, it's been a number of years, but when we spoke to Cary about a guaranteed access, it was expensive. I mean, because if they say that
relative.
everything is relative now.
Well,
absolutely.
Well, let's start to look into that, because the answer to that question depends on how much emphasis. We want to really throw our chips into the
To the western,
intake.
absolutely.
Otherwise, let's start to
And that
Get to it.
though will be a key element of the water supply plan, looking at the different supply options. Because, I can't imagine a scenario where Jordan Lake isn't strategically important for this community for many, many years to come. So the challenge will be what's the most reliable, cost-effective way to assure that resiliency that it would add to our overall supply. So, I think that's probably the most important thing we'll be looking at on alternatives. There's other things in play, of course, but just what's the best way to access that and have it guaranteed, not just mutual aid, help us if we can. We want to have assurance that when we need it, we can get it. But we're pretty sure it's going to make the better solution is in some type of regional approach, because having our own infrastructure for that would just be so cost prohibitive, particularly when our local resources are adequate under most supply and demand scenarios. It's just this severe droughts, prolonged droughts, or if there's, some other operational emergency. Ruth, and I ask you to correct or amend any of that.
Oh, good.
Ruth, I just have one comment and one question left over. Just on the comment, I just think as a board and in our community communications, we should just be cognizant, I think, of really to the importance and, as sort of a water person, perhaps the beauty of the quarry plan. One of the things I think is perhaps not discussed enough, and with one of the now I'm like Ed, I can't speak. The Cane Creek Reservoir is one of our key assets, right? I mean, it's clean, there's no industrial users, there's nobody upstream, right? So it kind of lets us start on third base, if you will, right? The water coming to the plant's clean, that makes it easier to treat, cheaper to treat. But the weakness of Cane Creek is that watershed is small, right? And so what you'd really like to do is save more of that really clean water, which is what we're doing, right? I mean, to me, the key aspect of the quarry plan is to better utilize what is perhaps our best asset. And I just think we just kind of, again, we can't do anything about it till 2035. But when we talk about the plan, I think somebody made some really great decisions a long time ago. So I think that's just sort of a good way to frame it. But then I have a question on page 2.5. When we look at the raw water demands, now the earliest year in this plan is 2025, and so we're projecting 7.42 gallons. And I wanted to go back and look at this spring's 5-year plan, but I didn't have time to. So when we went through the budget and grilled Stephen many times over that plan, the farthest he projected out was 5 years, which I can't recall if that would have been 2022 or 2023. But again, if memory holds, his projections were on a lower arc than this. What he was projecting wouldn't have reached 7.42 million gallons. So I guess my question is, how does this projection compare to what we were using last spring for the budget? And I think that's important because, sorry, I'm getting too close to my, we spent a lot of time with those 5-year plans, in particular looking at rate increases and capital projections. So I'm just curious to know if through this exercise we've gone through, and when we look this spring, which is going to come sooner than we all think, whether the projections of revenue are going to change going forward as a result of this analysis.
So a couple thoughts come to mind. One is that the revenue is also done on sales. This is raw water needs. So those are
10% more at least.
So those are going to be higher. The second thing is that when you're talking about it from a water supply source, I want to be conservative in that I don't want to run out of water, right? That's not an option, but we also want to temper that to make sure we're not overbuilding and unnecessarily spending our. No. Whereas for revenue,
I just want to know if it's different. I
okay,
like your approach. I just want to know, is this projection different?
Gotcha.
than what we were using in the spring, is really the much shorter version of my question.
Gotcha, all right. So how does it relate to what Stephen will be doing? All right. Anything else? I think I heard just oh, go ahead, Bashir, sorry.
No, that's fine. This is actually not a long-range water supply question. It's more, but it's because of your figure 8 and figure 9, kind of was like page 2.26 is figure 8. And I was looking at that distribution and I'm like, oh wow, it looks like, 100 gallons per day per dwelling unit looks like a pretty strong correlation there. But then you have all these outliers above it, figure 8, and similarly with figure 9. And it just seems like a lot of gallons for some building. And I don't know what the deal with that is and if we're doing anything to address that.
So some people may be using a lot of outdoor water use and they're paying a lot for it. So for some people, they don't get, the price doesn't really impact how they use water. But some of it could be a leak. That's not, because we're just looking at our data.
So yeah, I guess my question is
but there is wide variability in how people use the water in our community. And when you start looking at it from like a non-residential perspective, there's even more variability in it. Just because there's very different types of uses.
Personally, I would be interested in maybe just take the top 10 of both of those graphs, and I'd like to see, why is that? Because, I mean, it's somebody using 400 gallons a day versus the average is 100. I mean, I feel like it's something OWASA should be proactive and go to that consumer and be like, what's going on here? Or, look at who that consumer is, be like, okay, board, this is why. It's just something, it wouldn't be that hard to build to do. You know what I mean?
Unless we have a water shortage in place where we're limiting their water use. I mean, my personal opinion is they should be able to use what they want to use.
Oh, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying because I think we want to have our consumers be cognizant of their water use.
And I think maybe with the AMI, they can go on and look at how much they're using. But I mean, Ed, I'm going to let you jump in here.
Yeah, and Todd or Mary Tiger could jump in too, because with the portal, we hope we have some options to give, here's what your use is, but here's how your use compares to other users like you. So, and that kind of information might be really powerful. Someone sees, well, holy cow, I'm using twice what other apartment buildings with 50 units are using, for example. So I do think, part of rolling out the AM or the Aqua Vista and the portal and educating users about the value of the tool and how it can be used, I do think we'll learn quite a bit more then. But Mary, Tiger, or Todd, any? And it looks like Pat Davis is itching to say something. And I bet we have new board members that haven't met Pat, so Ruth, maybe you introduce.
Yeah, so Pat Davis is our sustainability manager, pre-Mary Tiger, and he's been kind enough to stick around and help us out, and he was very helpful in crunching numbers here, along with our GIS coordinator, Beth Canada. I got to give a lot of credit to the two of them for this report. But yeah, Pat, and also I just want to open up because if you feel like I answered something correctly or you want to add to it, feel free to do that too.
I'll try and be brief, which is really unusual for me. I think I've met most of you or all of you, but Rushir, two comments I make in response to your observation that there is an odd distribution among those two types of use, master meter multifamily apartment complex type use. Some of those data points, and we see it particularly for some of the smaller complexes, going to be older, less efficient, but also sometimes you'll see laundry facilities, swimming pools and things that might be embedded in one account, that all the use is covered under 1 meter in that account. And that drives up the use per unit, whereas some of those data points might not have like swimming pool use or an irrigation meter included in the account usage, because those might be under a separate account. So there's some factors like that. On the non-residential building side, some of the factors that contribute to what you're seeing in that distribution is a research building on the university campus that might be very water intensive, or a UNC hospital facility, patient care, if that is in that graph. And so you'll see some very water intensive buildings that are going to have a much higher water use intensity factor per 1,000 square feet than say an office retail type building or a restaurant. So what we're doing there is that's just it's a graph that is a scatter plot showing water use intensity per 1,000 square feet across a range of buildings with a range of different uses. We have the ability to break those out and show you specifically what they are, if that's something that would be useful to the board. One of the reasons we didn't do that is because in the projection set, what we have is the towns and the counties and the regions estimate of allocation of square footage of non-residential space that they expect to come to our service area, between now and 2045, and then there's that build-out projection, which is real fuzzy when and if it's going to occur. But we don't really know much about the detailed types of uses in that. And the categorization of the uses that are in that projection of square footage are based on transportation demand intensity factors rather than water use intensity, because those projections were done to support the regional transportation model. So it's not like we can take those millions of square footage of non-residential space and know, oh, X% of these are going to be service and retail, X% are going to be commercial office, X% are going to be intense water use type building. We wish we had a lot more certainty in those projections and could match the projections up to the different types of demands that we see across different spaces, but we just can't do that. And, it's unfortunate. It's part of the uncertainty that we're going to be facing. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like that's what I was saying. I don't know if this is really part of the long range agenda item per se, but I think I would personally like, just the top 10 of those on the top, left of the graph there. That I think identifying those and, saying, oh yeah, this is why this one is this and this is why this one is that. That'd be what I would request.
All right, thanks.
Do we have a customer confidentiality issue with that?
Well, historically, what we've done for the board is provide general information. Like this is customer A, and we don't provide any locational details. We don't provide any information that would allow you or allow the public to know who is that, where are they? They're bad because their water use intensity factor is this. Some cases they're not bad, they're really good. It's just they're different. And so we do, if we come back with any supporting information about those top 10 in both of those, it would be in a real generic way. And we hope you'd be comfortable with that.
That would be great for me.
Okay. Thanks.
That was a short response by
Pat.
Yeah.
Well, they don't allow me back.
Ruth, I want to echo what John said. I think this is an excellent analysis, excuse me, and report that you put together. Really good work. One thing I didn't get a sense of, and it would require a whole lot of digging, which I can't do, is since a lot of the projections are based on growth of people. I mean, that drives the number of dwelling units and the square footage and all that. It's important that we have, try to triangulate in on the growth numbers. And I'm sure you've talked to a bunch of different sources to try to get a sense for what the growth is. But I would caution you to go one level deeper and find out that those people haven't all used the same source. for their estimate of what the growth is?
A lot of it is the same by, Pat, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but a lot of like the state budget office with they go up to what, 2037? And then they use that as their basis to come out to 2045, and then
Yeah.
they had county totals. And then based on this model, they
Yeah.
allocated it within the county by how attractive a parcel of land was for development based on, how close was it to a planned transit stop, highway, other factor, employment centers, that kind of.
So, okay, so what you're saying then is that the growth model you're using is based on essentially one person or one group of people working on a single
Right.
estimate.
So there's that, and then as part of the State of the Community report, the UNC demographer also did population projections for Chapel Hill, Carborough, Orange County communities.
Okay.
And she did it based on, I can't remember exactly what the difference is. I think I outlined it in the report somewhere, but it's based on different periods. So if she looked at like the most recent 5 years and extrapolated out versus maybe from 2010 on and extrapolated out, got two different answers that were on either side of our line. So, I mean, I think when you look out at the 2045 or 2050 numbers, we're all within kind of similar notes, but a lot of them are starting with kind of that state budget office or the past data. Those are kind of the two starting points that I'm aware of. So
I wonder if there are other sources that you could tap into to get a couple other estimates of what the growth would be. And I don't know if there are, but I would imagine that there are enough big organizations, airlines, investors, whatever, who are facing big decisions on growth rates in this area that may do their own studies or may use other resources to do some studies. And if we could somehow tap into some others just to get comfort that we haven't faced a 50-year growth on, one person making one estimate. I'm exaggerating a little bit there.
I mean, I can talk to, the UNC demographer or the state office and or the COG and just find out what do they think about looking at other potential, what other sources are they and what do they think about them?
Yeah, maybe.
And their, that's what they're experts in.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm not suggesting that OWASA take that the analysis on themselves, but to tap into other resources that have done that already.
I don't know. I feel that these really long-range projections are, really not subject to being made too exact. There are just too many unknowns out there. So I think the prudent thing for OWASA to do is to update these projections every 10 years or so. We're not going to make capital investments now for something that we think will happen in 2045. So, we can proceed incrementally and update our projections as we go along. The thing I like about the approach that Ruth has taken is that she's used this community viz process that was done triangle wide. And I think the strong aspect of that is it's tied back to land use planning. And so instead of just, running a line up a graph with no constraints, we're the growth is somewhat constrained by the available land to put things on. So that seems like to me a sound approach. And I just believe that the incremental periodic readjustment approach is the safe way to go.
Yeah, and I do know when we talked to the local governments, they were glad we were using the regional transportation planning information. They felt like they had put a lot of effort into developing that information for the COG to use. So we're glad that we were building on top of it for this purpose. If I can find out something pretty efficiently, though, I can look into that a little bit more. But anything else?
Thank you, Ruth.
All right, thank you.
So I know there was no public here, but, and I think board given feedback. Let me ask you, Ruth, was there anything else you needed from us? You have everything you need from us? As far as discussion that you've heard for
I
next
think
steps
so. I
from
guess
the board?
the one thing that's outstanding is, just getting better information for you all on the Monte Carlo and the cost, whether it would impact schedule and what the cost of that would be. And I'm assuming I can do that through email and we can. All right.
So then, Ed, you have a verbal report for us for the proposed process to update OWASA's strategic plan?
Yes, agenda item 3, just 2 pages, which provides some background information as well as what we see as the scope and maybe key elements of updating our strategic plan. And I think it's important that we proceed with that, but especially given recent events, I think before we jump knee deep into this process, within the next couple of months, we're going to have a discussion about workload and priorities and issues. And, we had already scheduled prior to the water emergency, a discussion of the various issues the natural resources technical system committees are looking at, forestry management, source water protection, and the like. So, and I think the scope of what's on our plate, has grown, and you understand why. So, we would appreciate some feedback on your ideas about, the timing and the scope and the approach for updating our strategic plan. And, I think that's something we need to do in the next year or so. But, in advance of that, I think it's going to be really important for us to make sure we're all on the same page with the organizational priorities. What's first, what's second, what resources might staff need to execute, our highest priority tasks. So tonight, we're certainly prepared to receive your feedback on the process laid out in those 2 pages. But I think what we need to schedule even in advance of that is a fairly deep dive into, the priorities as we know them today, the things that are, most pressing for our core mission. So I didn't have more than a presentation than that, but, at this point, just checking in and invite your feedback and guidance of how you see us proceeding.
Ed, one thing is, this is kind of the question that you raised. I think we can do it in-house without having an outside facilitator on this topic. I don't see the need for that. I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
I had one comment, and really it's based on being a new board member. I'm not sure whether these 2014 strategic themes are what we want to have today. And given the February 2017 and this recent break, do we want to put at the top of the list some risk to infrastructure and system reliability? I mean, it's clearly something you addressed in 2014, right. But do we want it to rise to the top?
Yeah, and I think that's when we have a nearer term discussion about priorities and workload and resources, most of that's going to be built around, our core mission, safe and reliable, services. And, we're a very ambitious organization, a lot, affordability, energy management, forestry management, communications, community engagement. So, there's, lots of good and important things on our plate, but I think it's particularly important over the next year that we're really sharp and focused on our highest priorities, understanding, we just don't want to stop work on some of these things, or if the board agrees that, no, we don't want anything to slip, then, we have to present you a plan for resources to make that happen. Yeah, your point, if we were doing a planning session right now, I'm sure infrastructure resiliency would be at the top of the list, and rightfully so. And yes, that was captured in infrastructure sustainability and resource management, but certainly not with as robust of emphasis as we know it's going to get our attention moving forward. So again, my thought, while welcome your feedback on the overall process, I think our first task at hand is within the next couple months, just make sure we're all on the same page as far as expectations, highest priorities, resources needed to address those priorities, again, in the short term.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying, if the board doesn't think that we need an outside consultant, your point is that we think we might have higher priority items that may require this to be pushed later? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah, well, in an ideal world, we would, yes, we say now's the time to update that. Let's go through wipe the slate clean. Let's look at internal factors, external factors, our strengths, our opportunities, threats, forecast, and go through a process like we did in 2014 where, we had, I don't remember the exact number, 8 or 9 work sessions were devoted, to thinking through these things. And I think that was a very good process. And I agree, I think we could handle it in-house. But when we reflect back on that process in 2014, I don't think our staff, our team, was enough of the voice in that process, quite frankly. So, I think one really important improvement is getting more of our staff involved. And when I staff, I'm not just talking to people you see, every other Thursday. I'm talking about the team, the people that are closest to the work, closest to the issues and challenges we face. So, I think we need to go through a full-blown process, but I also think we can't wait to address the most critical things that's on our plate right now as far as issues and priorities. Because I think to do the strategic plan and do it right, it's probably at least a year process, maybe more if we're inviting a lot of community feedback as part of that. But, as you know, I think what the community is most interested now is reliable service in whatever it takes. So, I think that needs to be our focus over the next year or so to, just that's it. That's job one outside of employee and public safety. That's our most pressing issue. And, I try to reflect the same in my key focus areas for the coming year, which is on the agenda tonight as well. So I don't know that I've answered your question, but.
Yeah, I think you have.
Then it sounds like we really don't have a decision to make, because since the strategic planning process requires so much work of staff, and I think we all agree that the resiliency issue is the top one we have to deal with now. By definition, even if we bring new resources in, that won't allow us to do both at once, because an outside group can't do the strategic plan. That has to be done by the folks who will execute it. So we, by definition, we have to move that out. And the question would be, do you have an estimate at this point in time on how long the bulk of the planning work will be needed for the resiliency effort? And then we might have an idea of how far out the strategic planning needs to be pushed.
Not yet do we know that, but yeah, I think that's the first question we got to answer to then start scheduling when this might fit into our work.
I was going to ask a question. Within this plan, I did see that staff said that they could do it all in-house. What would the expert outside be able to help with if that was
We saw
requested?
that mainly to facilitate the process. You know, last time John Young volunteered and the board agreed that John, would facilitate the work sessions that we had with staff and the board. And he did a great job. They were very productive sessions, but it also put John in an awkward way where I don't think he always felt comfortable contributing since he was playing more of a facilitator's role. So, our thought, if we did want to use outside help, would be just to guide the process, not add substance necessarily. That's we're the experts on that, you all as policymakers, and then of course our team, but it would be more as, facilitating the process, not helping us prepare, but just going through a good collaborative process.
To me, it sounds like, I think what Bruce is saying makes sense to me, and that we can delay this topic. I'd be in favor of delaying this topic, personally. I'm not sure till how long, but, obviously I think the resiliency issue is priority number one, beyond safety, of course.
So the last update was 2016, and we're going to look at this every 3 to 5 years. We've still got 2 more years.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with delaying it.
Ed, I'm
For the
confused. Did you
strategic plan.
ask to delay the process in this?
That's not in the written, I mean, this was prepared before November 5th.
Because I sure didn't pick up on that.
No, and in this, especially in the work session setting, I wanted to, have a chance to talk to the board about that. And no, I did not write in that I'm suggesting delay. So you didn't miss anything. I didn't have it in there, but I do think it makes sense to pause this while we focus on the task at hand, and then, hopefully several months from now, we'll know when we might pick this back up and schedule its work. So yes, our recommendation would be to pause.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Did we ask for a public comment? I don't know if there's no public here, but,
There's not a public here.
oh yeah, we don't have to do that. I keep forgetting.
There's that.
So I guess I have one question based on our consensus that I perceive that will delay updating the strategic plan. And, the Natural Resources and Technical Services Committee is focusing in these 2 recent or upcoming meetings on forest management and source water protection. Are you suggesting that we add a topic on system resilience, or should we just wait for the staff to bring information to the board?
Well, it's certainly understood, but that's the top of our to-do list, is to address the various items on resiliency of the system, which includes, the work that's underway now, about why did the pipe break, about our response. We're also looking at what accelerated improvements should we make at the water piping in the yard in front of the water plant, and expedite a project that's likely going to be something we ask you to add in this year's CIP. You also know about our work to update the modeling perhaps have that modeling include more of a resiliency element built into that. And you know, it seems like I'm missing one. And I know, Ray, you asked the question and we provided the list. So what did I miss from that?
Yeah, I have to look at
The list, but you know, so without it written in the strategic plan, we know that's our marching orders to address, you know, these things
Is
right
that-
away. And I suspect every board agenda for quite some time now will have different elements of that where we're seeking advice and guidance or approval of resources and things. So I just, and that's not populated in the 12-month schedule, we know, but I'm sure it will be, you know, moving forward.
Is that the number 6 agenda item and for the December 13th meeting update on water distribution system improvements? Is that in general or is that
It's a
specific to
catch-all
the?
placeholder.
So that could be used to provide
update
an
on-
update.
Yes, sir.
And it seemed like to me that should occur at least once a month until
Yes,
we wrap our arms around the plan anyway.
I agree.
So then, discussing the draft OWASA action items reoccurring every 3 to 5 years, agenda item number 4.
Yes, Ruchir made a suggestion some time ago, and I did email this out to the board earlier this year of the format and draft, and I think Ruchir had another comment regarding what was it? It was a frequency, right? That we've added to what went out. And so tonight, we're seeking your feedback on this format. Does this format work for the board? Are there additional information you think ought to be on that? And for the items that we've listed, we certainly invite any feedback on those specific items as well. So it's a draft, but we think it's a good suggestion, and we see it as a useful tool for us and for the board. You know, because again, on a 12-month schedule, there were many other things, you know, in the pipeline that needed to be done. So capturing it in a structured way like this, you know, we think was a very good suggestion.
So just, I do like the format. It's a good reminder of the things we do periodically. But then just, you know, as Jody had mentioned, we've been having an internal discussion on source water protection, and in reading through the packet, Ruth, it caught my eye. I wasn't aware that the DEQ was drafting regulations on this, and I'm just kind of curious if you know anything about that, and perhaps that would drive the answer to our frequency question.
Yeah, actually, hot off the press, the Commission for Public Health actually adopted the rules last week. They have not yet been to the Rules Review Commission, which I believe is December like 13th or something. They're meeting on it. Now, my understanding, Robin, from like the recesses of my brain, my memories, is that the Rules Review Commission, in theory, is only supposed to comment on whether the rule is clear. But they sometimes overstep that, I think, so.
Sorry.
Sorry. I think you're right. I think that's what their function is, but I think they sort of do what they want.
Okay. Yeah, and I did take a quick look at the rule that was sent over that the Commission for Public Health, and ours is due, I'm going to say it was January 1, 2024, the first one is due, and then they're due every 3 years thereafter. And it's not specific that the board needs to approve it, but somebody is supposed to sign off on it, and I feel like our board would be the best to do that. So, thank you.
Anyone else?
And we're also thinking that while this probably doesn't need to be in every agenda every 12 month, you know, perhaps quarterly, or
That was exactly what I was just going to say. Yes, I think.
Because what we could do is quarterly include this in a work session format. So, you know, if there's something we need to flag or discuss, you know, we'll have that look at least 4 times a year if that works.
Yeah, I don't even know if it needs to be that frequent, but yeah, I think we should look at it. Yeah, that's the only thing I was going to add. I think this is great. I'm glad you guys got this together.
So now we're moving on to agenda number 5, discuss key focus areas for OWASA's executive director.
Yeah, it's following the same format we used for the last 2 or 3 years. I've updated the key focus areas. This year, unlike prior years, it's been the practice that I would email this as a working draft to the board in advance of it showing up on an agenda item, but because of so many canceled meetings and reshuffling, it just ran out of time. So I know this hasn't had the benefit of some of your individual board member feedback, which has been helpful in the past. Certainly some of the key things to flag under operational objectives, items H, I, J, all relate to resiliency, and there's, more projects, for instance, the study of why the pipe broke and evaluation of a response isn't listed there, and I'll add that to that. On the Agua Vista project, as you know, that's on time, on budget, making excellent progress, but in this coming year, rolling out the portal is huge. So, that's just going to remain something really important for our team to follow through and do. And then the new strategic plan, you've provided some guidance tonight on the timing of that, so we'll appreciate that. And then, as Yinka noted, there's a doodle poll out that hopefully we can find a date, end of November or in December, to have our work session devoted to communications and community engagement. And that's perhaps even more important as we know how, in fact, one of the important feedback we've heard this morning at the Chapel Hill meeting and others is the importance of keeping the community informed about what's going on. Updating us as something, so our message, we need to keep it sharp and clear and updated, with specific action items. So, working, looking at the whole of our community engagement priorities and approaches, and what resources we might need to make sure expectations are met. So we definitely look forward to having that work session devoted to that topic here soon. But as far as process, this is not something we need to, I know it's on the 12-month schedule, Andy, for approval at the December meeting, is it not? But it's also, if you want to take more time to think about it, or questions for me tonight, or feedback, either tonight or individually, so I can certainly make some changes, and if we need more time to talk it through, it doesn't have to be, we're definitely not waiting for this to be approved, to be busy each and every day. So is it on the December 13th? Yeah.
I have a question for you, Ed.
Please.
So when I'm looking at the new strategic plans, I know we just talked about pushing back the strategic plan, so we're still keeping that in for your performance year period?
I would say through September 2019, that'd probably come off. We may talk about some, a process and a schedule, but as far as being knee deep in the strategic plan through September 2019, probably not. So I think that is something I would amend before you see it again.
Bruce?
So under the ops, number I, number I is to look again at the replacement renewal prioritization model. The risk assessment project that was completed a few months ago was of this campus, but not the water distribution. Is there a plan to do a risk assessment or risk reliability assessment of the water distribution network as well? And if so, when, and should that be in here also?
We don't know the best way to approach that yet. We've talked about the consultant HDR, who we selected through a competitive process to update the model. Our plan is when we have our next scoping meeting with them, we're going to, ask them what they think could and should be incorporated into their work, to address that. And so can it be incorporated as part of their work? Is it a different consultant and standalone, following a similar process of the risk and reliability work that was done at each treatment plant? And Todd, Mary T, I also invite you. So yeah, this is still a work in progress to sort out how to best, approach that. But I definitely want to make sure that's captured. So any reader of this can say, yeah, this is what I expected the director to focus on in the next year, that addresses, risk and reliability. So, I think we can, sharpen this language to make it real clear to anybody that this is a top priority for us and for me.
It seemed like to me maybe, Ed, that risk assessment and risk analysis and assessment, those priorities that came out of that study ought to be a bullet in
here as well,
in the number one list there. It's quite a number of bullets, but that doesn't appear, and that's certainly related to the February 2017 incident, and we should keep that a priority until it's completely
yes,
addressed.
I agree.
Okay.
Ed, I did have a question regarding the diversity and inclusion. When I'm looking at the expected results, I think I'm looking for, especially for part A, for something a little bit more in detail. That just seems like generic to me to reflect the community.
Yeah,
So,
this is simply the two main goals on the program. Nothing more than that. In fact, one of the action items from that work is to propose, metrics and measurements for how well the program is doing. In fact, I think we might have even talked about that at a recent meeting. And so far, what we've come up with is, repeating the organizational assessment. But that doesn't mean we're throwing in the towel on other metrics, to measure our success on that. So yeah, you're right. Again, those expected results are simply the two main goals that we started the program with from day one. So there's nothing terribly enlightened or new with respect to that. That is something we've talked to Visions about. In fact, in one of our training sessions with me and the 5 department heads, we talked about that quite a bit. And so we don't have a good answer, to that yet, especially understanding that, this is an ongoing program. So the results, not just numbers on a chart, how many of these, how many of that in different levels, that's certainly part of it. But, how engaged are employees in the work, their level of satisfaction, are they staying or are they leaving? Do we have a flexible work schedule that meets the needs? And so it's just different, a lot of things that are maybe indicators, but I don't know what a leading indicator might be for some of this. And we know kind of lagging indicators, right? Attrition, turnover, success of the organization. But, what are some of those leading edge indicators of success? So far, what we've agreed is repeating the organizational assessment and asking employees, for their feedback and doing that by the independent consultant.
I guess what I'm looking for, and I don't know if this same thing that Inc. is looking for, is commitment to identifying mean, not specifying here on here, but identifying mean to judge the progress that we're making. And so that you don't know which way to do it at this point in time, but by the close of next year, at least have started that program like doing it before. That's what
I know for me also, I'm interested to see out of the employees who chose not to participate, how many are choosing to participate now that they've seen the result that it's having on their coworkers. I haven't seen an update on that, or maybe I've missed it, but I haven't seen an update to see how many people are actually going through these group trainings that we have.
Yeah, I do think that's a good measure because a lot of the training has been mandatory for supervisors, but it's been voluntary for employees. So tracking over time when we have sessions or, repeat sessions, what is the level of participation? Is it, yes. And, we have, as you know, we have 3 groups. One's an employee resource group, and the numbers on that group, has grown. And the interest has grown, and then that group's been very active. So again, so I think there are some simple numbers that tells at least some of the story about, interest and participation. But I mean, it can be, numbers of grievances, turnovers, EEOC complaints, and for inclusion, again, it's just, how engaged our employees throughout the organization at different levels, their level of satisfaction. We're a smaller organization, so it's, there are limited career advancements sometimes. So when there's turnover, that doesn't reflect poorly always on the organization. It could be a feather in our cap by earning a reputation of, OWASA is a place that values diversity and inclusion, and I worked there 5 years and I've advanced my career and I've moved on, and then, yeah, that person recommends, oh, absolutely, I'd recommend you put your name in the hat for employment there, or your kids or neighbors. And so, building and earning. So I think another measurement over time is the quality of the labor pool we have when we do recruit. And it is a tight market. I mean, for some positions, we get an enormous size pool, administrative assistant, even communications, community relations officer. You'll remember we had over 200 applications in the pool. That's one of the most talented pools I've ever seen. And of course, Linda's extremely capable and been a good hire, but we go to try to find a utilities engineer, we might be lucky to get 2 or 3 applicants. And Bob, I know this is a lot of what you do part-time now, and you know how for some jobs, how tight the labor market. So again, it's a competitive advantage for organization if we're known and recognized as having, a work culture that embraces diversity and inclusion. So it should be an advantage. So I think that's another measure over time, our success in filling difficult positions. Of course, pay and benefit, has to be part of that, but certainly the quality of the work experience is key too.
I know my one main point is, and I think I brought it up before, I'm not sure if it was in the meeting or just with visions of making sure we're not focused so much on the numbers, but more so on changing the culture of the environment. Because if you haven't changed the culture, the numbers will come and the same numbers will leave. But if you change the culture of the organization, then once you get those numbers in, then they'll stay, and then you'll have diversity all around where it's just like one of everything. So
right.
Just want to make that clear, that we're not looking to just change numbers right now.
No, that's right.
Anyone else?
So is it, so how we'll proceed is appreciate the feedback. I'll make some changes, and if you have any other suggestions, you either want to call or shoot me an email about, so when we have to finish this agenda, Andy. So we have to have this wrapped up, say by December 5 or 6 at the latest. So if you have anything you'd want to add as far as feedback, please let me know by December 5th or 6th, and then it goes out on the agenda on December 7th.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead to agenda item number 6, review board work session.
So the first is any requests by, of course, board committees, board members, and staff, and I do have some staff requests, but we're always after board members and committees, so.
I know there's a couple of committee meetings we had. NERTs, a couple of those were canceled and then rescheduled. So I know the 2 we have, one is definite and one is pending if we need it, correct? Okay. And then the HR one, we're forwarding to January once we get our time. And we just have the one finance, not a separate one. Okay. All right.
And can you refresh my memory about the community engagement? Are we waiting until the board has discussed that?
So as far as I know, there's not a community engagement committee meeting planned. So not sure if there's going to be one. It might be full board when we're discussing things that are dealing with engaging the community.
And perhaps the board would then ask the committee to meet and focus more deeply on the issue.
If it chooses, yeah. Any other committee request, board request? Okay. So Ed?
So Mary Tiger emailed you the scope of work for Hazen and Sawyer to determine why the pipe broke and to evaluate our response to stop the leak. So that work is underway, and as you saw, their time for performance is December 14th, I think it is, so about a month, and they were on site today, and we've met with them previously. So we are proceeding with that scope, but if you see something in that scope that you think is missing or is not clear, still let us know, or let Mary Tiger know, and we'll take that under advisement. Or if it's something that you all think is glaringly missing and that you want to give us some marching orders tonight, that'd be fine too. But again, that work is proceeding, and we're proceeding along that scope. But again, it's not too late if you see something or you want to have some clarification or some specific expectations in how the report perhaps is structured. And again, and I know you haven't had it very long, so but if you do see some things, if you can let us know within the next week by again popping Mary Tiger an email, that'd be awesome.
Along the lines of that, I just wanted to know, I kind of looked at it briefly, but I forgot what exactly is in it. Is it taken into account some of the comments we heard from the public when we went to the Chamber of Commerce and just general board discussion of other things besides just those 2 main questions?
Well, it is around those 2 main questions, but I think it is responsive to what we've been telling the community. We want an independent evaluation, objective evaluation. Why did the pipe break? Why did it take 8 hours to stop the leak? And that we're making all of our information, all of our employees, whatever the consultant thinks they need to objectively answer those questions, we're going to fully cooperate and participate, to that end. So yes, I'm comfortable, our team's comfortable that this is responsive to what we've committed to the public that we'll do. But if you see something that's unclear or perhaps missing, we certainly would like to hear from you.
I read it and I thought it was written very well. Just one thought. It mentioned that Hazen and Sawyer would do the forensics, or it wasn't clear who was going to do the forensics, but it did mention a metallurgist. There are forensic metallurgists, and perhaps that's what was intended.
Yeah, And Mary Tiger. And by the way, we appreciate Mary Tiger going to bat. And the next thing I'm going to talk about is resources, but we are stretched thin, so we have taken Mary off of some of her other very important tasks and asked her to play this role. So thank you, Mary.
Great. Mary Tiger, Sustainability Manager. And we are contracting with a meteorologist. The team cut a section of pipe today that professional would like, and we're shipping that to them. So they expect to take about 2 weeks in looking at that section of pipe.
So my other question is about resources. As you know, there's a lot on our plate, and we really need to follow through, do a thorough job in addressing priority one, and our plan right now is at our December 13th meeting, even though it's not on the agenda, we want to bring you a much more refined request for resources. But just to give you a preview, in our capital improvement program, answering to Vishnu, the manager, we have 3 utilities engineers. The board supported just a year or so ago adding a third. Well, unfortunately, Dustin Rhodes is resigning. He's got a chance to advance his career going back to the state of North Carolina. So we've lost a third of our project management experience, and that's historically that's been a very difficult position to fill. And from our last financial report, we've already slipped on that schedule, and now losing, Dustin is certainly creating a hole in our team. And again, it's going to take months to fill. Plus, we know we're going to have more work in the CIP, to address reliability, immediate short-term reliability improvements at the plant, as well as longer term. So on December 13th, we're likely to ask you to support a 4th utilities engineer. And that doesn't mean we're committed to 4 utilities engineer in perpetuity, but given that we do kind of regularly have turnover in those positions, we certainly can right size if that's needed, down the road. But given the importance of keeping all of our capital improvement projects moving, having more of a cushion when there is turnover, and perhaps equally as important, for our operating departments, Todd's departments, the water plant manager, the wastewater manager, distribution and collections, often there's need to bring in, a professional engineer, a technical person to help, our operations staff, troubleshooting, creating more efficiencies, just a wide variety of projects. So our bench is so thin because of the workload in the capital improvement program. So, and I know we don't want to be knee-jerk in what we're asking for. We need to carefully think through, and since we, don't have a clear path of all the future improvements we're going to make, this will be something we continue to build in, but we really see the pressing short-term need that we need to bolster our capital improvement program staff with a professional engineer. And also in the distribution and collection department, it's clear we need to greatly increase our work in our valve exercise program. And so there's staff and equipment needs, and Todd's going to pop up here and talk to you a little bit more about that. So just wanted to let you know that, we're working on those plans. We on December 13th, we want to bring you some specific recommendations, and they'll be justified, and there'll be background, and, and if it's something that you feel you can't approve on the 13th, great, or if it needs to kick into next year, that's fine too. But again, we do think there's just some things that are really obvious of what we need to plug some gaps and some holes. And again, I think we can do that in a way that doesn't keep us from still being very efficient, very effective, longer term. I'll give you another example. With the Agua Vista project, we've committed to not fill vacant jobs for utility mechanics that are reading meters. So over time, we were going to, drop, 6 utility mechanics and 1 crew leader, right? But now we're thinking, and those are authorized positions, although not fully funded in the budget for this year. But, we're thinking, we need to hang on to some of those utility mechanics when the positions become vacant and increase our efforts in valve maintenance program and perhaps, another piece of equipment as well. So, and of course, we'll be better prepared to talk to you about budget implications of that in short term, longer term. So, but again, I think it's not just a knee-jerk reaction. There's just some real clear needs that we'll ask your support on filling in the short term. But Todd, I'd like to invite you up to fill in some blanks and that I may have missed.
Sure, Todd Taylor, I'm the General Manager of Operations. I kind of gave the board, or a lot of the board, the pitch this morning for the valve maintenance side of things. They did a really good job, but the events last week kind of made it crystal clear how important the valves are out in the system, and I would even put them as a higher importance than having really good pipes in the ground, because you could have a brand new pipe and it would, you could have a leak and you still need to be able to isolate. So, just thinking about that event last week, I mean, there were 17 valves that had to be shut off all told in order to get that leak isolated. And some of those were on a 20-inch line, and those valves that size, it's about 160 turns to get that valve shut. It's you have to shut valves out when water's flowing through a pipe. Those valves have to be shut very slowly, so that every turn of that wrench is just moving that valve a little bit, and it takes quite an effort on something like that too. That's not something that one person can go out there with a wrench and turn that valve. I mean, that water is under pressure, tremendous amount of flow going through there, so it's resisting closing. So we have a machine that we have that can perform that kind of work in a response mode. We've used it. We purchased it initially really to be an exerciser, to go out and day in, day out just exercise valves. But what we found is it's a very important piece of equipment also for a response, because if you get these big valves, or you get in a situation where you need to close a lot of valves, it's a much quicker way to do that. It's a much, you can wear people out pretty quickly if you need to, you only have 2 or 3 people out there trying to close valves, and that's some really hard work to do. So one of the things that we're thinking about is, when we think about our valve maintenance side of things, I'd really like to take our program from just, what we started it as was, we kind of looked at, okay, what's industry best practices, and we were trying to set a goal of, we're going to exercise all our valves over a 5-year period, which, over the past 5 years, we've made a lot of headway there, but we're not quite there. And there's some issues involved with that as well. And I think the next time we go around and exercise valves, will be more efficient. But I'd like to take us to not just being, here's kind of the, standard, level of service that we provide in that area, but being a best in class, and maybe trying to cut that down to where we're exercising all the valves every 2 or 3 years. What I think we need to do to do that is we need to establish a crew that's really dedicated to valve exercising. Right now, our valve exercising program is in our services crew, which handles water main breaks and things like that, but it's just a part of that crew. It's not their sole focus. So I'd like to set up that crew, take those resources, put them in that crew, and I'd also like to purchase another valve exercising machine and retain a few of these resources that Ed was talking about, that we were intending to reduce our forces with the Agua Vista project. But I'd like to retain that crew leader position and probably a couple of the utility mechanic positions to operate this new machine. We also believe that that would help our responsiveness too, because we have 2 of these machines, to where if you got in a situation like this, you could have those 2 machines operating valves simultaneously. I mean, that automatically is going to cut down in half the time that it takes to operate the valves. That's my, quick elevator pitch to you all, and we'll have more details and numbers and things like that, hopefully in early December when we meet again. Thank you.
So Ed, it sounds like you're going to do it anyway, but the one thing that caught my ear when you were talking about the fourth utility engineer position was utilizing that position also to do some in-house work and other, outside the capital area, which would cut down on, not only would that cut down on us having to hire outside resources for that, but then that person would already know the system. And so, if you do, I'm sure you and the staff work on it, Stephanie and Stephen, but you might be able to show that it's not even an additional, well, anyway, I'd be interested to see the trade-off in the expense. And
Right.
You
And
kinda-
I think it also will support succession planning in the organization, just having a deeper bench, particularly having the utilities engineer very involved and engaged in the operations end, not just the capital projects, and that team now of, 3 minus 1 and Vishnu, they're overseeing $15 to $20 million a year of investment. And again, when someone drops out, we lost a third of the workforce, and it takes months to replenish that. So having a more resilient, there I go, I said it, engineering staff for capital projects. But yes, so when we're fully staffed and projects are coming along, there's even more time to work with Todd and Ken and Monica and Randy, the operating units in a number of areas. So,
Just wondering if you've ever considered hiring a seconded staff from a consultant to pitch in from, X number of months.
yes, and we have actually used that in the past, and that's an option. Even with an experienced project manager, there's kind of a steep learning curve about projects and doing projects in Chapel Hill and Carrboro, and so yes, that is an option. We have used it in the past, and Mary Dar, who couldn't be here tonight, is definitely looking at that option now to fill the gap, while we recruit to fill Dustin's job. So yes, that is an option we've used in the past and certainly will consider using in the future. But it's a tough job to recruit. And I know it also, introduces, is the classification and pay, is it at appropriate level and marketable? And, that's things we need to keep an eye on as well.
Right, and if this position has additional responsibilities compared to the other 3, that might not be the same, at the utility level 2. I don't know, it's something you have to consider, I would think.
Yeah, right now we would see it would, and with our utilities engineer, it's a bit of a band, because if someone has professional engineer registration, they automatically move into a higher pay band with those qualifications. So we have the flexibility to hire someone that has a PE or doesn't have a PE and maybe working towards it. So we have some flexibility there, but I also know what you're saying, is there some higher level, and we still have to go through the process to replace Adam Haggerty, our asset management engineer. So, that's another vacancy. And I think at the last meeting, you knew that Todd Spencer, been with us 25 plus years, retired, and Jessica Goudreau from the state, she starts Monday, I think, no, December 3rd. Yeah, I think she starts December 3rd, and she brings a lot of background and experience, not so rich in capital project management, but source water protection, drinking water. She was the state 30 years. She's a professional engineer in charge of the public water supply section. So, we're bringing a very talented person, on the team in early December. But, even with that, we are spread extremely thin right now in engineering. And so, do those sound like things you might be in a position to support in December? And if there's some specific justification or background you'd be looking for in a staff report, I mean, I think we have a good idea, if we were you, what you'd be looking for, but is there anything that might come to mind right now that would help inform our preparation of the agenda?
I have one thing that comes to mind, and that harkens back to something Yinka said about having measures of improvement in diversity and inclusion that aren't necessarily numeric. And that might be a description of where the outreach is for recruitment for those positions and how that's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, we do have a growing, expanding list for outreach for diversity, absolutely. Yeah.
If you're looking for numbers, then the increase in the numbers of places where you go is a number. But I think that would be a valuable thing to present to the board when you're discussing this increase in staffing.
And does OWASA have a policy of not beginning the recruitment process until a position has been approved by the board?
Yes, if the board has to approve, our classification and pay system. I don't even think legally you can delegate that. I think that is something the board must do as far as how positions are classified, how positions are paid. We do have what's called an early hire for training for when an employee gives notice that they're leaving or retiring. The board has given us the authority to begin recruiting and hire the replacement so they can work side by side as part of a transition. And we successfully used that in the past. So that is a tool.
So I'm thinking specifically about a couple of positions that are very tough to recruit for, that I would, I'd wonder if we could have some flexibility in terms of beginning the recruitment, not signing, not offering a position or signing clearly until the board has approved it, but to get the
Well, we're going to recruit for utilities engineer now because
Right.
we have a vacant position, Dustin. So
right.
ideally, in that pool of candidates,
You could find a second.
We'd find a second candidate
Okay.
if the board, let's say on December 13th, approves the new utilities engineer.
Okay.
So we're going to start that recruitment right, before Thanksgiving.
Okay. Well, in the future, I would hope if it is a tough position to recruit for, that we could begin a recruitment process, perhaps even before the board has approved the position, just to give you a little more time to get the
I love your thinking. I'm not
But it's
sure
not-
we can do that.
No?
And again-
You don't really have positions. So
Right, until the
you
board
can't really
acts.
say what it is.
Sorry, you can't really describe the position, describe the pay classification until the board's defined what it, but this works for this.
Sure. In this case, it does.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Okay.
couldn't you, if you wanted to, I mean, I've seen plenty of job positions that don't describe their pay range in the, I mean, I know that's what OWASA always does, and that's what, all state government and municipal or whatever, they always do, but in the private sector, they never do that.
Let's just say, I don't think it would be a best practice. If the position, we're talking about new positions, if the position already exists, then it's not efficient.
Right.
In response to your question, I think I can fully support and happy to hear that you're thinking ahead, and that and certainly with Todd's thinking ahead about the valve exercising on wondering how we're going to get all this done. And so certainly I appreciate your thinking ahead with the staffing issues that all these things require. I'd also like to hear from you about what the thinking is about a more short-term fix, or what you could do in the short term, what Mary's thinking is, and support pursuing more.
Were you referencing the piping in front of the water plant, or?
staffing issue, short-term staffing
Oh,
issue.
okay. Oh, yeah, okay,
Creating
sorry.
another position that's going to take months to fill is not going to help in the short term, but we've got some immediate needs. And so maybe if the recruitment, say in the first round, is not successful or something like that, what can we do to get all this stuff started?
Okay, yeah, we can report on that on December 13th as well. Sure.
So where are we?
Yes,
finished
thank
with
you.
the
We
December?
really appreciate that. Thank you. Also, on agenda page 6263 is the agenda as we knew it last Friday for December 13th. We'll of course be updating this agenda to reflect the items we discussed tonight. And you'll receive a presentation from Allison Reinhardt, and I think for some of you, you may not have met her yet. Simon Lobdell, of course, you saw not too many meetings ago at Town Hall, and we really look forward to you meeting Allison. She's doing a super job and has a very important project on the wastewater side of the house, so she'll be presenting on the 13th. And that's also, and this was scheduled earlier, the annual update of our strategic trends as well as the items on our strategic plan. So Ruth and I will be doing that at your next meeting. Again, item 6 there on page 6.3 is that placeholder for an update on our actions, short and longer term actions for system reliability. And as Mary Tiger mentioned, we'll have a bit of a deep dive on water loss non-revenue. And we'll also discuss priorities for the Natural Resources Technical Systems Committee. So it will most definitely be a very full agenda on December 13th. Are there any key things missing from that agenda? And if you like, I can walk you through January 10th. It too, I'm sure, will be evolving and changing. So, in the interest of time, I won't do that. But if you have any questions or suggestions for January 10th, and of course, we'll have another look at the January 10th agenda when we meet on December 13th. And as far as action items, we really appreciate your feedback on the water supply plan items. There's quite a few things to follow through and do, and we'll get back to you on that. So rather than reciting all of those, we'll have a more generic item show up on the pending key staff action items reflecting that feedback. So
I have
Yes,
a question.
please.
The scope of work for the HDR project on updating the model, I don't recall. Are we going to see the
yes,
scope of work?
that is one of the items on our pending action item list for Vishnu to provide you that scope. There is a draft scope, but we need to meet again, to talk about this reliability, redundancy, resiliency aspect of that work. So once we believe that's in much better shape, we'll send it to you as a draft. So long before that work is executed. And I think that will be particularly important that we have that as a discussion item on agenda, not just pop you an email saying here it is. But I think this rises to the level that we want to make sure, board's expectations are being met. We're all on the same page as far as how we envision that project, what it includes, what it doesn't include. So I think that will be particularly important. So we do need to flag that in our 12-month schedule when we think we can bring that back. Because as you know, Mary Dar said we would work to complete that within a year. That's a very aggressive schedule, particularly if we're going to expand the scope. But yeah, I think that is something that will appear on an agenda very early next year.
Anyone else? All right, so without further objection, we are finished.
Thanks, Ronald.
Ed?
Pretty sure you talked to Dustin Bond if he was asked us.